Welcome back to Open Line. We're speaking with Beth Brown tonight, president of the Teachers Education, I should say Tennessee Education Association, which advocates for teachers across the state. Beth, thank you for joining us once again. As much as we talk, I should get that right. I do want to talk about what we have learned over the past 3 academic years, as you said, with COVID. But first, let's go to the lines. We always appreciate when people chime in on this conversation. Robbie is on the line. Robbie, thank you for being with us. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I'll tell you, the only thing I can figure out with this COVID, it's vaccine, but what they're not understanding, I think, is you got some people that have a natural immunity to it, or I ain't gonna say immunity, but they've had it, they're gonna get it, and they might get it again, but leave the vaccination alone if they're already, what do you call it, natural immunity, if you get what I'm saying. I think we're over pushing the COVID shots.
Okay, Robbie, thank you.
And there's a lot of people hospitalized with that's already had the shot. Anyways, we'll leave that alone. I know I kind of got off subject there, but thank y'all. Y'all have a good night.
All right, Robbie, thank you so very much. Beth, we talked a little bit about the remote learning versus not doing it. Any other lessons that you really hope our school systems and state leaders will consider as we move into 2022 and how we do education in this state?
Yeah, I think one of the lessons of the pandemic, and as an eternal optimist, I'm always looking for the bright side. I think that the pandemic has forced us, particularly in the earliest days as we were trying to figure out how to provide instruction to students, and recognizing that using technology wasn't even an option for so many students across our state. I think the pandemic has really forced the conversation around education opportunities in our state, and what kind of resources that students have or don't have depending on where they live, depending on their zip code, whether they're in an affluent school district or a rural district like the one that I attended and taught in for nearly 20 years. So I'm hopeful that we don't forget that, and as I know that as we're having conversations around our education funding in our state, does seem to be increased conversation about a real need for additional nurses, counselors, school psychologists, social workers in our schools in a way that conversation has never really been embraced before.
I'm glad you took a step that way. Now I want you to put back on your teacher's hat, because this gets confusing. Explain BEP to all of us, because this is going to be a big topic of conversation over the next few weeks and months.
Yeah, so first of all, if you don't understand what BEP is, do not feel bad. Most Tennesseans don't, and a lot of educators don't. But BEP stands for the Basic Education Program. It is the funding formula that our state uses to determine how many dollars they are going to send to individual school districts. Now, our state really likes to brag that they fully fund the BEP, or the state funding formula. What most people don't understand is that formula does not fully fund our schools, okay? So when we think about what it costs to educate a student, the state is a minority funder. They send about 48 or 49% on average of what it takes to educate students in a particular district. In some districts, they send much less than that. Wow. So, but the BEP is the funding formula, and currently that funding formula has about 46 different components, and they are based on ratios. Like, we will fund X number of K through 4 teachers on so many students. The discussion right now is to move away from that kind of formula, which in our state has been in place since 1992. So it's been 30 years that we've been operating under our current funding formula. The conversation and the process that's occurring right now is a review of our funding formula and whether or not it needs to be shifted to a student-based funding formula. And so the conversations are embracing and acknowledging that and to Mr. Matthews' question earlier, how much does it take to educate a student? I can't speak to how much Nashville currently spends on average, but I can tell you that it costs more to educate some students than others based on whether or not they have any disabilities, whether or not they're English language learners, whether or not they're having to overcome some obstacles to learning because they come from economically disadvantaged communities. So depending on a student's needs, the cost is higher. And so those conversations are actually happening right now, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I would say it sounds like the TEA would be in favor of this, moving to that student-led model.
Well, it's a complicated conversation. I will be very transparent. I do serve on one of the 18 subcommittees appointed by Governor Lee in the Department of Education. And so as the president of the largest professional organization in the state, I was tapped and have been serving on one of the 18 subcommittees. I can't tell you what conversations are happening in all of the other committees. I do know that we have been working since early November. We have a couple of more meetings, and then our recommendations are all going to a steering committee. It'll be really interesting to see what comes from the steering committee to the General Assembly. I can tell you that the Tennessee Education Association certainly supports those kinds of conversations. They're critical when we're thinking about the funding that our schools need. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that we can't simply talk about how we're allocating the funds if we're not also talking about increasing the funds. If we're just carving up the pie in a different way, that's not going to take care of our students' needs. And so I think we got to have two simultaneous conversations. Not sure yet if that's going to happen.
That was going to be my question. Is that happening? 18 subcommittees seems like a lot. Are we overdoing it here? Are we overthinking this?
I was not consulted when they designed the process, so I don't know what all was in the design. I do know that all of the subcommittees are they target different constituency groups. For example, there is a committee that's composed of students who are a critical voice when we're talking about school funding. So there are a lot of perspectives coming together. That's why I can't tell you that the TEA is going to come out in support of whatever the result is of this process, because there's so many components to it. We've not seen the final product yet.
And what is the timeline for this?
So the committee that I serve on had our fourth meeting last week. We're scheduled for our fifth meeting next week, and each committee is slated to have 6 meetings. My understanding is that we should be looking at a draft and providing feedback on a draft next week. And as a committee member, it is my understanding that the General Assembly will probably be getting a recommendation at the end of this month.
So during this session?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I would be shocked if it's not one of the first pieces of legislation that's considered.
Fantastic. Okay, we have to sneak in another quick break here. When we come back, we'll be coming up on the half hour. Just want to remind you, we're talking about education in 2022 in the state of Tennessee. Stay with us.